Okay, everyone, this is a special episode. I have someone that I've looked up to for a long time. I've never met in person, but have been following on social for a long time. He is an expert growth marketer. He is a demand gen guru. He is a creative content king. He's crushing it quarter over quarter over quarter at VanillaSoft. Uh, Ollie, thank you for joining. Ollie Whitfield, thanks for being on the show, man.
Thanks for having me, dude. And I love that intro. If you want to be my PR guy, hired on the spot.
There you go. I got to come up with those bars to introduce our guest. But no, I mean every word of it. Definitely a demand gen guru in a big way. You know, the relationship between the area that I specialize in, sales development and demand gen, that relationship very special. You know, we're like best buds in the trenches. You know, we're our inbound models and what's served up to us as a sales organization highly depends on the efficacy of what you're doing at the top of the funnel in the demand gen realm. So definitely looking forward to unpacking in this interview what organizations can do and ideas for maximizing lead gen and pipeline development, that sort of thing. So I know you have a lot of perspectives on this, but before we jump into that, for our audience, something that I thought was interesting in our planning. So your last name is Whitfield, and you live in a small town called Whitfield there in England. I'm here in California for those that are where it's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon for Ollie. It's 6 o'clock in the morning for me. But you know, Whitfield from Whitfield, right? So is there any relation there with the family? With that's doesn't happen. I don't see that very often.
Yeah, it's my village. I'm kidding. I wish it was. That would be really cool. It's one of those like I have a friend whose last name is Peters, and he lives in Peters Village, and I now live in Whitfield, and my name is Whitfield,
You
which
guys are
is
taking over.
yeah. Like I wonder who's next, really. But no, absolutely no correlation. I moved here because the family are here, and weirdly, my aunt and uncle, who are 2 minutes down the road, they looked at a house on the plot that I'm now at, and
There
I
you
was
go.
going to buy one of their houses as a sort of means to get on the ladder, and it
Mhm.
wasn't to be. And they said, you know what, you should look at this place in Whitfield, and I'm like, sure, and then ended up here.
The way I work, that would have been a total sign for me. Williamsville or Williamstown for me would have been like, oh, yep,
Yeah.
that's where I'm. I don't care how long the commute is. I'm meant to be there.
Oh
uh,
yeah, yeah. I did think on the day I bought the place on my way down, but when you've got the ribbon to cut on the door and all that kind of stuff, I did think in the like hype of I did it, I finally did it. Today's the day, and you drive around, and you think this is where I live now. It's named up. It's me. It's my name. It
yeah.
was very strange.
Yeah, King Ollie Whitfield in his town of Whitfield. Very good. Well, how far is Whitfield out of like London? I think for those that are not familiar with the region, you know, are you pretty close or?
About an hour and a half, and if you looked at a map, we're pretty much on the tip of where Calais and Dover, the ports, are together. That's sort of the
Mm,
most people in England would know where Dover is, just because it's always in the news. There's always queuing and problems with the ferries and all that kind of stuff over the
okay.
front. So it's but about an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Copy. All right. Well, I've made it to London once and didn't get out to Whitfield, but definitely
It's where the
love
party's
the
at, man.
country.
We've got a McDonald's, we've got a superstore.
There
That's
it
it.
is. Sounds like my small town Turlock here, where I live. It's a pretty small town as well. I think 40,000 people. So cool. Well, let's talk demand gen. The first question I want to ask you is about inbound models, inbound marketing. So do you think we're in trouble at all with inbound marketing? It's getting harder to target people and to garner attention. Um, it's getting more expensive. You manage a budget for, you know, Google advertising, SEO, and et cetera. So it's getting more expensive. It's getting harder to target and garner attention. Do you think, you know, all these companies that rely on inbound sales models, uh, are they going to have an awakening in the near future? Is this going to be something that we're going to have to pivot from? Or is there some, you know, solution on the horizon that's going to make this bring it back to being what it used to be, if you will?
I don't know. That's a good question though. It's sort of a long term thing. I can see
Mhm.
that there's so many people in business now. There's like a bigger population in the world. That's just going to happen. There's more people who work. There's so much bad practice. There's so many people who are just
Yeah.
power to them, just not that good at stuff, and they're doing good in their business somehow or another, and they stay afloat, and that works for them. But if I'm not that good at whatever I do, and I have 6 clients, well, that's 6 companies who aren't probably going to do that brilliant. And that's more prevalent than you think. And it's not to say that there's no good work out there. There's so much of it. But I think it's just a bit of a shame that, you know, that's quite common, and that holds a lot of people back. And particularly like in companies that you might work with and some that I've worked with, it's those things which they start to build like a bad feeling of, well, you know, that marketing team kind of sucks and we're like on our own over here. And that's like so common. And that just makes everything harder from that point. So yeah, and with that I can sort of see a little bit of, let's strip things back. Let's, you know, do we need to do that extra channel? Do we need to do that extra project? Could we do 20% better with the same bandwidth and resources on one project if we did a big deep dive on it? Probably. And would that be worth it? I think sort of the VC model of cash to burn, do something with it.
Spray it out, something's going to hit. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not always bad. Obviously, there's a lot of companies who have done very, very well from that, but it's not the healthiest practice, sort of holistically, I would say.
Well, what's your take on the AI component of that? You're talking about creating, you know, some good work. A lot of the work that's going to get created, you know, in the coming years is going to be generated by artificial intelligence. And I would imagine you're probably looking at ways to, you know, double down on your content creation as well. Do you think that's good for us long term? Do you think that's, I mean, in the short term, obviously it's going to make our lives easier as sellers, marketers, demand gen folks. It could make us more effective as well to a degree. But do you, because it's going to be at such an accelerated rate and everybody's going to be doing it, is it going to kind of, in some ways, do you think it might work against us if we're generating so much new content on all these different channels at such an accelerated pace now that we have these AI models that can fuel it?
There's already so much out there anyways that that's the sort of danger of it. So for instance, it's very applicable almost immediately to have more blog posts. For example, as a marketer, you could just say, ChatGPT, write me a blog post about how to ABC, 1,000 words, whatever you want. These 6 headings, these keywords, this tone, what you can do, whatever, and it will spit something out. And I would assume over time that will become more the case and it'll become better. And people will do that, which is fine if you're doing a lot of SEO. But there's already so much, like my LinkedIn feed does not ever end. You cannot reach the bottom because there isn't one. So let's add jumps the fire of gasoline on top of that. I don't think we need that. But what it can do, and what I've seen some people start to do, the very, very beginnings of it. In my room right now, it's like 2 p.m. sunny day. It's kind of dark because I've tinted the blinds down. I've got a little bit of shadow. I've got my lights on here, not that you can really tell. Or maybe my audio is a bit scratchy. If I look this way, maybe the audio goes a bit less quality. It can improve my audio. It can improve my background. It can do a lot of things like that without really you having to do too much. Even just you run it through a tool and it does it. That's it. So there's things like that. There's could be
like for these episodes, for instance, being able to cut out the ums and the spaces when I'm editing my clips, you know, which I do myself. I think about that as well. As I need to be putting this through an AI engine that can cut this up, you know, Descript or, you know, some tool like that that can automate that. So definitely from that standpoint, making us more efficient.
Yeah, and there's a lot of it. Like if you think, say your podcast, you're on YouTube, there's plenty of the audio of your voice talking, and you said a lot of words. You said probably a vast percentage of the dictionary, barring the random ones, at least several times. It could repeat you so easily. Or if you think, I remember one of the first ones I ever saw was a deep fake of a Joe Rogan podcast. Obviously, he's probably one of the best people on earth to create in this kind of sense because there's so much of his content. But even me, I've done loads of podcasts, I've done tons of webinars, I've done loads of videos. It could easily just take a bunch of me talking and spit out something that looks and sounds dead like me. What's the need for me anymore?
One episode, even you wouldn't even need the bulk of them. You know, there was one platform, I think you send a 30-minute script and you read for 30 minutes in a script, you send it in, and then it can basically emulate you in any context. Yeah.
We've even thought about it. I've like had the idea. We sort of decided to veto it internally. It was, you know, what if, and people have done this on TikTok and gone like stupid viral. What if we got like Tom Cruise to write a cold email to me? That would be a super funny LinkedIn video, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
or
exactly.
You know, if we got Morgan Freeman to cold call me, especially with his voice, that would be so cool.
Right. Yeah.
But like, where's that ethical line? So we didn't do it. Maybe we will. thanks for my brain for just giving that idea to everyone else.
Right.
But there's a lot of things like that. There'll be novelty worthy things, and I'm sure they'll get burnt out fairly quick. But
well, I don't want to beat this too much, but you said an important word. You said ethical. And it reminds me of another discussion I had with another guest about the arms race, right? In some degrees, AI is like the new atom bomb, nuclear weapon within our landscape of B2B or in business in general. And is not always good for business to that point, right? And so, but people and organizations that are trying to maintain an ethical front, maybe are not adopting certain aspects of it to drive content creation or what have you, because of these belief systems that we have as an organization. But not every organization has those beliefs and has those lines, and so they'll push the envelope, which in turn, does that then force the company that was holding the ethical line to say, you know what, maybe we can push the envelope as well. So it becomes this, everybody is arming up with this tool. And that's where I go with it, is like, is this really good for us long term? I wonder where the regulation becomes and that sort of thing. That's a whole separate AI episode, but I feel like it's at the center of a lot of discussions that we're seeing today in this pivotal transformative time that we're in right now, with it affecting every area of every business.
The time to worry is if you're like a executive assistant, something like that, where I forget the name of it. There was one years ago. It's probably better now, but there was I got an email from someone booking to go on their podcast, and they said, arrange it with whoever. It's like a female name. And that was AI. And I didn't know until afterwards I'd heard of it again. And that was all right. You could kind of tell it was a bit offbeat. It kind of said things that didn't sound sort of like the flow of the conversation, but it was workable. But, now that could be completely gone. But for a salesperson or a marketer, just lean into it. I mean, you're in no danger, in my opinion, for at least some time. Right. Like the ones who would do better, they'll just get quicker and eliminate some stupid stuff that they don't want to do. And the rest of the stuff they do, they'll do as they did.
Right. Okay, cool. Well, fair enough. I appreciate that. Let's switch on to a topic that I know is pretty near and dear to your heart and to mine as well. As working with SDR teams, one of the most important plays that we run in combination with our demand gen brethren are our webinars, right? The leading up to the webinar, driving traffic, seats and attendance to the webinar, after the webinar, doing the follow-up on what we hope to be good leads. But you have a particular viewpoint on how webinars are conducted, generally speaking, traditionally, if you will, and how they might need an overhaul. Can you kind of just give us your viewpoint on that? You were sharing what you shared with me in planning.
Yeah, well, like in my agency days, I saw so many webinars that I'm just overexposed to this. So if it sounds extreme, it's because I've had too many experiences of watching and planning these things. And you get to learn quickly what annoys you about it, what's good or what's not too bad or what could change. So in 3, 4, 5 years of like 7 webinars a month across a few different companies, and what guests do we have on, and how do we format it, and what deck do we have, what talking points. Oh my God, it gets so boring. Yeah. And I don't even watch webinars at all, ever, because I'm so like burnt out of, apart from recording them, which I really find quite good fun. I don't. So I'm not exposed to other people's too much, but you can always tell from the way that people promote it, they're still doing the same stuff. Normally, one person who's like the marketer or the sales leader or whoever the forefront spokesperson is for a company, they're the host / insight giver as well.
Right.
Someone else comes on, probably some, like a sales trainer type of thing, or another respected person.
Someone with following, someone that can bring a drawing. Yeah.
It's never not someone who's got a following. Doesn't matter if they're stupid or clever. They've got a following. We can use that.
This is why I never get invited.
Well, me either, really. My following's not too cool. So, I'm working on it, but there you go. That's how it goes. But what they do is they just open up and they say, hey, Derek, so here today, we're going to talk about SDRs and how to make them succeed. Give an overall broad tip. And then what they do is you'll do that. We'll go through 3 or 4 talking points that are kind of fairly obvious that beforehand any of the audience could have guessed.
Make sure you
on a
use
list
LinkedIn.
Of 1 to 10. Yeah, we could have got there. If it was on Family Feud, they probably cleared the board type of thing. No big deal. And then you just in a medley throw things out, and it's not that useful. It's just especially when you add 2 or 3 other guests. If you disagree with someone, there's not enough time for it to happen because we've got to have person C talk and then we've got to move on.
Yeah,
You're
there's
just
no,
throwing like
yeah, no
stuff.
debating, no alternative viewpoints. You called it the agreement fest in our planning. I thought that was funny.
Yeah. When have you ever seen a proper disagreement that actually had weight to it
Well, I don't know,
podcast?
Ollie. I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, honestly, I've been on
I was ready
those.
for it then. I was so
Yeah,
ready.
right. No, I agree with you 100%. I've been on those shows. I've been in those planning sessions where we're setting up the talking points and the whole nine. I've administered those conversations on stage, and you're right. It is, that's a really good point. Let me add to what you're saying. Let's double click on that. And um, I think it would make for a better, more informative discussion if there was alternative viewpoints, right? And you see that in other realms. I don't have an example that comes to mind, but when you have, maybe in politics, I guess, is one where you have someone who has one viewpoint and they're strong, they feel about, and then you have someone with a polar opposite viewpoint, and then you have a good, episode to talk through. So is that what the new approach, or I mean, I'm sure there's more to it, but is that one of the components to a revised or evolved approach to webinars?
Yeah, boiling it down, something like that, although a little bit the funny you said politics, that was the first thing I thought of. The politics shows over here awful in England, but it's just like shouting at each other and disagreeing for no reason. But in a simplified way, yes, though it doesn't have to be polarizing opinion. It can be a
Right.
different angle, different experience. So for instance, if you were to break out the same SDR webinar we sort of jokingly came up with there, if you were to devise it down to 3 topics, we're going to say good SDRs get onboarded well is maybe one of the topics. So I'll bring on the first guest for 15 minutes of my 45-minute show is an onboarding discussion, going deep and narrow with that one person who's got something interesting to say about that. Then 15 minutes, thank you, Mr. Guest number 1, off you pop. And then number 2 comes out, and it's about their continuous professional development and how they go about that and how their company helps them go about that. Guest number 2 comes out with a particular experience and a few stories about that, deep and narrow on that again. And you can guess what happens in the third one. I like to do that. I think if I sit there and listen and it's the same 3 people going, yeah, and you absolutely crushed it a second ago when you said, let's double click on that. I love what you said about this. I hate it when people say that stuff. It's so like, oh, insert another way to transition me into talking now. Like,
Right. Yeah.
I love that, Derek. That was so great. And I really agree. Oh, God, can we just give it a break?
On that.
It's terrible. And people know that. It's like when you get like in the corny sales emails you get, I hope you're staying well and staying negative or whatever it is, the
I hope
COVID
this
joke.
finds you well, as Lavender likes to tout.
Yeah, people see those phrases and they're like, oh, whatever, man. And it's one of those things. So I like to break it up. You hear a different voice every now and then. People stay, we go deep and narrow, and hopefully your notes are a bit more extensive than just like you and me and someone else throwing stuff up about the same points. And probably we're going to like overlap significantly because we haven't really gone deep and narrow.
Yeah, and some of that has to do with the fact that once you have established a following, it's like a celebrity effect. You can kind of get away with doing anything, right? Your people will show up and you will have attendance, right? You'll have 400 people that will, attend that live webinar for that one shot in the arm. But will the leads be the leads that you want to go after? Or are these just people who are part of, their audience who are trying to learn from the content they're generating as a thought leader, as opposed to those executives, those revenue leaders that might be able to convert, right? So I think that's kind of goes along with the challenges there. Is like, it's great that you can have these figureheads bring people, but is it the right audience that we're bringing in? And that was the other thing. I know you're in a lot of ways, you were saying in planning that the approach to promoting the webinars, pre, during, after, all that is, to you've been doing it for a long time and pretty simple. But you had mentioned about like writing promotional emails, storyboarding, how many times to post, these sorts of things. So you sounds like you have a pretty thought out process to promote a webinar. So if you and I were going to do one like you just described together, for those that are listening that aren't really, or maybe they're planning their first webinar, what are the high points there? Like, can you kind of break down what that plan looks like with, I mean, I'm sure it's probably pretty detailed, but in general, how does one drive an effective attendance for a live webinar?
Basically, the easiest thing to do is take out the points that you're going to talk about and do one thing per thing. For instance, 3 talking points is, it could potentially be 3 posts, 3 emails, 3 different types of ad. Insert whatever thing you've got available to you. 3 podcasts, you go on to talk about something else. Not the best one, but you know, you can see the logic.
Yeah.
So if I have the SDR idea webinar again, email 1 about it. If I'm doing 3, could be the onboarding stuff that the subject line reflects. SDR onboarding tip with a fire emoji or something. And when I click on that, the link is, we're going to talk about all of this stuff, which heavily includes the thing that we talked about in the subject line. Then we have a certain creative or certain imagery that we have in our ads. Maybe we make a quick promo video, like we get on a prep call, you and I go, hey Derek, give me a 1 fire SDR onboarding tip. And then you give me 30 seconds of fire, and then we clip that. And that's a post. And that's a talking point about topic number 1. Same thing and around for each of the talking points. It doesn't have to be so much work. And my sort of guilty thing that I've done so many times is, I've got this idea. How do we do this? Rather than just, what best can we make of this stuff? Because without having to work hard again, think of anything, we're already doing this. We've already planned it. We've already thought about it. Let's just, like, how do we regurgitate across different things? Right. Could be a LinkedIn slider if you want to be a popular, cool person. Go for you. If you want to do a video, if you want to do a text post, you can do so many different things. So picking out your channels and really depends on who you're trying to target. So I'll leave that alone, but you really don't have to work harder than what 3, 4, 5, 20 things are we going to say.
Got it. Yeah, I think trying to get people in seat for the webinar is key. Means a lot for us on the SDR side, is, you know, shipping those leads afterwards. But, you know, talk about this promotional forever concept, right? It's not just promotion for one time. And that's how a lot of us think about these webinar strategies, is let's get this webinar done and executed, and then we'll move on to the next webinar. And then, you know, and I'm guilty of this with my episodes. Even, you know, if I look at my first 5 episodes, my first 10 episodes, I'm not doing a good enough job of recycling that content. I mean, each one of these episodes is an hour. There's all sorts of clips there. And I'm remiss in bringing them to the forefront and continuously promoting those episodes, because those gems are still there. That content is still relevant, and it can still be generate interest and grab attention. So from a webinar context, is that what you're saying as well? Is like finding, once that webinar is done, you've ran the webinar, doing the same thing that you were talking about with prep, is then cutting up those clips and then having some sort of ongoing 6 weeks down the road, we're still talking about it. Because you had talked about how can we make it so that the webinar isn't dead after a week?
Yeah, been very guilty of that, and probably 95% of people doing anything like that are too, and they haven't even thought about it really, which is a shame, because you do all this work and this thinking and this prep and promotion, you write so much stuff and you post it, and it's all good and it's all fun, and then the webinar happens and 45 minutes later you're back to your normal life, which is a shame. And then hopefully you're looking at how did the follow-up go and all that stuff, but it does die off. And there's one thing is saying it's now on demand, or that's kind of the done phrase to say it just means it's available forever. You go to the website and you can find it, you can watch it at any point. That's standard, very easy to do. Most of the time you just change a link or change an image, and no one sort of has a problem with that. How much does that really do though? Not a great deal, unless you've got massive traffic coming to your site. Like if you're salesforce.com, you could probably get a lot of people come watch it without doing anything. That's not the case for most people though, and especially if you're not getting like 1 million visits a week on your website. So how do you do it? Well, a lot of people, they just make clips. So like for a podcast, that was a good point, and we'll take that and we'll put that on social media. Social media's kind of had a weird downturn, particularly LinkedIn. I think most of us would agree you've had like a struggle to hit the reach you could get a while ago. I don't know why that happened. I think they've really cottoned on to the link in the comments idea. It was, don't post the link in the post because that gets significantly less reach. So now put it in the comments and then it will work. Well, it doesn't so much anymore. And like me promoting my own things, you promoting your podcast, I'm sure that we've all seen that. So that's a shame. So
so you're saying the algorithm has been adjusted to some degree and is no longer favoring things like link and comments, but there's other facets. It's just in general, you're seeing, less engagement when you would bring, a figurehead audience, a thought leader into a webinar, for instance. It's like it's less than it was before. Is it saturation as well, do you think?
Yeah, a little bit. I'd say we could probably get round numbers 30% of what we could get before, just from direct social promotion only.
Wow.
And that's, whatever influencer in their crowd, if they did the same post on the same time and day now versus a year ago, it's just that much different. And that's a shame. I get they, like a LinkedIn particularly, they don't want you to leave the platform.
Right.
Makes sense. People are kind of abusing it as a link in a comment. It's not really, like, if you think of how to use LinkedIn, that's probably not the best way to do it, is it? But it was a workaround. So definitely. And what that means is we've pivoted quite significantly in the past few weeks, where we're sort of experimenting with it and seeing how we go. But it's going to be more, instead of, here's a good point that Derek made on that webinar about SDRs, it's going to be more like, what are we talking about in September? And what is that topic? And hopefully we solve a pain point about it. But what things do we have in our catalog, and many sub-layers to that we could reuse and put out associated to that? So for instance, if SDR month was September, just to pick that example back, my my Google Sheet internally, which is super ugly and archaic and terrible, if I've got the SDR webinar that we did with you, and I know the 3 subtopics were A, B, and C, I know there's probably a good clip in there if I'm looking for related stuff. So it's just about, I read through my menu like I'm trying to pick a meal, and I go, I wanted that, and I want that and that to use in my campaign. And then the campaign is, whatever are we going to do? Is it a series of blogs? Is it a PR post on some big website like Forbes? Is it 2 webinars and 3 ebooks and an email nurture campaign and some ads, and or what of all of the things that marketers can do?
Right.
That's our now, how do we reuse stuff? Because it's sort of part of a piece of a puzzle that builds a bigger picture, rather than like, come to the webinar again. We want more webinar views. At least, like in that situation, it translates to something more.
Like I can only hear Derek's insights so many times that in that recording.
Like, we only need one clip, and that's it. Never use it again.
Right. So if I'm understanding, the idea is clipping together topics from different episodes, different webinars, this sort of thing. If social selling was a topic, we would pull those clips, those segments from the 5 interviews where we touched on social selling, put them together into one piece. And then you have the content plan that you talked about, 2 blogs, 2 videos, and a couple ads, right? And that's the recipe, or some version of that. Once you've stitched that piece together, that sort of anchor flagship piece, now you have a way to promote it and get the content in a diversified manner. It's not just recycling one episode or one event webinar. It's a multitude.
Exactly that. Yeah, you've got the 3 times the experts mentioned their LinkedIn profile in the podcast. So that's the 3 experts downloadable checklist of profile setup, which could be one of the multi-pronged entry points to your little campaign. And then after they've got that first piece, then they might get you send them the link to the 4 podcasts about how to use LinkedIn polls in your outreach. Or the next one could be about how to Twitter DM appropriately, or, you going from each one. It can be different types of content, but rather than making new stuff, you already have it, roll it together in a different way. It doesn't have to be quite as simple as that, but if you've got a catalog and a menu to do that from, at least you can pick it out.
And that's the key, is creating that catalog. Because I have show notes and different things, but you would need to be very copious about tagging, or tracking attributes of conversations in order to have that catalog. So you can say, let me scroll, let's pull that one, and then now we have the 3 or 4 pieces that we want to pull together. So it goes to the organization of your content as well. So those that are on the sales side, I hope you can gain a greater appreciation for the level of detail and organization and creativity that our demand gen brothers go into, because that pipeline, those opportunities you're working on, which probably half the time are driven from an inbound model, there's a lot of work that goes into that, and we have to, I think, if we want to be great sellers, we have to really understand the marketing side of it really well in this modern age. One of the areas that I know from a demand gen standpoint that you do a lot of is email as well. And one of the conversations you had, an interview you had with David Delaney, 10 Bound, on the 10 Bound podcast, really stood out to me. And I'll be honest with you, helped shape an area of my SDR training. And that was when you were talking about frameworks over templates. We all have a sales engagement platform. VanillaSoft, I'm sure, has a template, our template options built in as well. So we're all familiar with the concept of templates. And I think, to your point, in our planning, that's usually what gets handed out and shared most often, or here's a template that's working for me, try it out. But your viewpoint is, if people can get accustomed to leveraging frameworks, we can get more dynamic in our messaging, and probably more effective in our messaging as well. But what do you mean by, more frameworks, less templates?
Well, a template is literally a tactic in practice. Nothing more than that, particularly, at least for the most part. A framework is like using a stencil or putting yourself in a box. And if I said to you, write a blog post about something, you'd struggle to come up with a topic because it's far too big. I've given you nothing. You've got no idea what to come up with. If I tell you, come up with a blog post about how to use AI as a sales rep, super narrow, you're able to go and make a start. Your creative intuition is going to kick in a little bit at that point. So in the same way, a framework is less is more. If you're told, here's roughly what it's got to look like and how to structure everything, your creative muscle starts to flex itself, and it says, okay, I've only got a sentence to do the value prop. How quickly can I do it? Or it's got to reflect this personalization I did prior to that. How do I bend and knit the two together? Or the call to action's got to knit in a piece of personalization again. How do I do that without it sounding stupid? All of those things come to mind very quickly. And of course, as well, my massive weakness as a SDR, as a salesperson, I kind of write for me, and, make no bones about it. I'm 26 today. When I was 19, I didn't sound like any of my buyers. Let's just be real about it. Like, I'm an English dude trying to sell to like American 45-year-olds, something like that. They don't sound like me. And I'm pretty jovial, like casual sounding. They're probably a bit more serious than that, a bit more hard-nosed and business numbers and things. So I had to try and really adjust my tone, my length of email, my mediums, my formats. I'd never do a video, for example. I just wasn't very comfortable at that age. I now am, I don't care, but I'd never do one. Maybe at that point, if the frameworks or the cadence I was doing went through several frameworks, I'd have done it, because it said, this one, it's not got too much meat to it. It's kind of middle of the cadence. We know it's probably lesser likely to convert. That's why we put a video in this one, not the first one. Yeah, sure, I'd have done it. Or the last email is a throwaway shot to nothing. We'll put a stupid GIF in it. I never thought of that because I didn't know to do it. So the frameworks, if you've got some good ones, or if you know, like, I'm going to try and use these 2 or 3 to help me write most of my emails, they at least give you that box to kind of live and breathe in, rather than like you're in the wilderness just looking around and grabbing stuff.
Yeah, it's like going grocery shopping on an empty stomach with no list. Where do you start?
And no budget.
Yeah, and no budget. So a framework that I think is pretty common, that I know you've talked about, and most that I've been emailing for a little while are familiar with. It's a standard transit setup with some linkage, but problem, agitate, solution, PAS. So for those that are maybe new to the idea of using email framework, the idea is that you can imagine an outline on your screen you're going to write, and you have sections where you're kind of being prompted to fill in that section. So the top section would be the problem. What's the problem that you've observed? What's the issue that you are familiar with that's common to that persona? Or if you know that person is struggling with a particular problem that you can help with, even better. But opening with the problems. This is a framework you're familiar with and you've used, I imagine, as well, right, Ollie?
Yeah, that's one of the 5 that I spoke to Mr. Delaney about. So I know PAS fairly well.
Well, the A is honestly my favorite part. That's why I picked this framework, because it's what is A in the PAS framework?
Agitate. So make the first part of the email worse. Basically, you've got to be really good with your messaging now. You've got to know, because there's no trigger event or there's no personalization point in this which grabs the relevancy. If you're wrong, this is deleted. Point blank. Don't be wrong. You have to know the persona. You've got to be like pretty sharp on your targeting. Otherwise, this ain't going to work at all. The agitate is just where it becomes a bit more fun, though. It sounds a bit, you know, dark, but if you
Give
nail
us
the
an
problem,
example. That's the fun part.
yeah. So it's something like if you're talking to a sales leader, have you ever wondered why one rep books more demos compared to the others? There could be other problems. There could be more sharp pain points. But if I'm a sales leader, that's probably quite annoying, bit of a head scratcher. Yeah, I did wonder that. And, you know, knowing the persona, that's probably accurate in some level. So to go further, and you do have to disarm this a little bit and then you agitate it. I like to say something like, in my experience or in our experience or what we are seeing means, like, I don't know how you feel about this, but most people say other CEOs that I talk to, that's kind of like wishy-washy.
Yeah, I'm
Like,
not everybody else you talk to. Yeah.
yeah, like, oh, cool. You talk to so many CEOs. You must be so impressive, right? I don't, that doesn't do anything to me.
No
So
sarcasm there at all.
I love to say, like, I see, I experience,
Right.
I have found, and that then you can say, no, you're wrong. I don't see that. And that's fine. Or you can say, yeah, I kind of see that too. It's like a way of softening. And then you go and make it worse. So you say, it's because they're not disciplined. And you hit them with like a punch right in the jaw and you say, it's because your reps aren't disciplined.
And that's
From my
that's the
experience,
agitation statement.
yeah. But you've softened it by saying it's not because yours aren't, it's because what I've seen, this is universally the case most of the time. May not be for you, but it might be. Think about that. Already they've gone, yeah, actually Jenny's like crushing it and Gary's not. Like, is he disciplined? Is she? And then you've already gone through that. And you can carry on and you can sort of add a secondary point to really pummel that home. You can say, well, it's because they're not following up on all of their leads the same. And what happens to those leads and what a waste of time and money. And you've just gone from like level 1 to, like, if you know Inception, like level 3 or 4 Inception type thing. It's fairly quickly and sort of dramatically. You can go like over the top a little bit. We know it's a dramatized thing. It's a sales email. It's not going to be 100% accurate, but that quickly, that fast.
Right. I mean, and then you're drilling down into the pain. You're pressing the bruise effectively with the agitation statement, right? And it could be as simple as something like, it doesn't have to be that way, right? And using your example, or that must suck. That must be keeping you up at night. These something that can really just exaggerate the pain that you expressed in the opening of the email. And then, to your point, it naturally segues into some of that solution-oriented talk track as well. So what's another framework that you think is cool and that someone could use today?
Not mine, but I think he kind of took it down, or he's changed it. So sorry, Josh, but Josh Braun has a quadruple T, which I think is pretty good. Cool thing about most templates like PAS, there's BAB, there's loads of them. You could kind of interchange the letters and make your own.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's most of them lack a trigger event of some kind, so you could always add the T to your BAB or whatever you want. But Josh it's basically a sentence per point here. So it's trigger event, third party validation, teach them and tell them. And the teach and tell is kind of where I've struggled to execute this particularly well. But for an example case, you might say your sales team has grown since you took over as job title, for instance, just making anything up there. And then your third party validation, this is kind of where most reps go, companies like HP and Oracle, and you're talking to a 9-person company, you know,
read
that type of thing.
Come on, know your audience.
Yeah, like at least close-ish, market-wise or size-wise, that type of thing would be good. So in my example, I say Gong and LeadIQ. I know people at both of those companies. They're not competitors, but we know each other. And I could call up people there and say, hey, like, is that true? Do you work with them? Are they good? And, you know, they could do the same if we were mentioned. So I use them as an example. You can do that. It doesn't have to be direct competitor. You may not actually work with a direct competitor, so that's not always applicable. But a bit of third-party validation.
This is the third party piece.
That's right.
The second T in
that's the second line. And then as you go down, it's teaching them. So it's kind of like an illumination statement, not a question. It's more of that could be because. And again, sort of like
some
the
data
previous
point,
email.
some research study that touts X, Y, or Z.
Exactly that. Yeah, it's a bit like the one before. You kind of soften a little bit to say could be wrong, but here's what we say, and then you kind of put forward your thesis as succinctly as you can. And the last point is kind of, this is how you learn some more. It's basically the call to action, but hey, if that did resonate, then this is the direction to go. Come talk.
Yeah, the email frameworks, I think, are honestly a game changer, particularly for those that are trying to up their email efficacy, getting more email replies effectively. So for those that are on the front line, SDRs, salespeople, demand gen folks that are crafting emails to wide audiences, leveraging frameworks, right? We sit down with a canvas and we wonder what we're going to say. We might have some bullet points of what we need to weave in, but how do we structure it? Where do we start? And the frameworks really make doing that repeatable. And remember, the framework you use in email 1 may not be the email framework that you use in email 5, right? Diversify, switch it up. Otherwise you get tuned out, you get predictable, and these sorts of things. And one of the areas that I wanted to ask you about from the email standpoint, though, is the brevity drumbeat, right? So we have this framework now, we need to fill it in, but we only get 50 words, supposedly. We only get maybe 75 words. We have to do the 4-word subject line, right? This is what we hear a lot. This is the drumbeat in social media from friends, from people we know, and it does work. I've seen it, and I do it, and I teach it. So brevity does work. Short emails, short to the point, less is more. It works. It has its place. But isn't there still a place for more, I wouldn't say verbose, but maybe more lengthier emails, right? What are your thoughts on that? I hear a lot about the short emails, but I think there's a place, especially if you're using the storytelling framework, especially if you've already spoken to somebody before. I think the door is open to those lengthier emails. So I get a little exhausted sometimes with the short email drumbeat.
Yeah, that's how things die out. It's everything looks and sounds the same, it is the same, and I don't see it. That's universal. So the opposite of a good idea doesn't have to be bad. So if short is the new cool thing, bad does not mean a long email. Sometimes, and probably arguably, any webinars I've done where I've asked, name the top email writing people, they've universally said this on my shows. They normally show me a really long email as like their go-to thing. I'm like, that's so strange. All we talk about is short emails and do this and do that, but don't make it look like this. And then when they show me what they do, then that's not to call them up. They have very legit tactics that are very clever, but that's not what most people are sending. It's kind of short emails are easy to read, so that's probably good for everyone to do.
Yeah,
but if you're selling to
test and all that,
yeah, literally. But if you're selling to people who are like pretty highbrow, then that kind of thing is washable. There's sort of a bit of psychology going on. I think it's like, I cannot stand the Red Bull drink. It tastes disgusting. It's small and it's like expensive compared to other things. That's why people buy it, because you think, you know what, like, I got to pay that much for it and it's not that big. It must be bloody great. And then they buy it and they drink it. Whereas the can of Coke, which is like £1 and it's kind of all right, not brilliant, it's kind of unrewarding. It's like throwawayable. But that Red Bull, you're not throwing that away, you're drinking it. Same type of thing. If you get this big long email and it's like research to death and it's super obvious that it's for you only, yeah, probably
there's the key, right? It's not the blanket wall of text talking about ourselves that's not customized, not thought out. So there's the key, is that if you punch it full of research and transitioning to the point, making it relevant, and it's all about them, the longer emails do work, even upfront early outreach.
Absolutely, yeah. And sometimes to call out Jen Allen's one that she shared with me, a lot of it was copy and pasting from press releases. She'd go to, let's say, a newly funded company, big press release, and she'd quote, let's say she's talking to the COO, she'd quote the CEO's wording to say, this are the things that we're going to do, like a paragraph. Add a paragraph to any email, you can consider it long. If you add 3 lines of text to it, 4 lines of text. She's literally playing back their words to them, and you cannot disagree with it because it's hard text and it's been said. That type of thing. Nothing wrong with that. It's smart, and you had to research it.
Yeah. Well, for those that are listening, who is Jen Allen as well? I think that might tie this together.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so at the time she was the Challenger Sale Chief Evangelist, and she's now doing something like that at Lavender. So funny timing. I had her on the week before she moved, so she was both at that time, but she's at Lavender now.
We'll have to try and get her on the shows. But we had William Balance on, but Jen sounds like she'd be a great guest as well. Well, this has been a great informative discussion. If any of those folks out there, particularly like in a part of our audience are sales consultants that are running their own consultancy, and I think trying to get our message out there, trying to be creative about how we create pipeline and lead gen for our own practices. There's a lot of things that we can take from this conversation just in that, because that's a big part of the audience. But for those revenue leaders that or those demand gen leaders, I hope that you've learned a lot today from our demand gen guru, our content creative king, our expert growth marketer, Mr. Whitfield from Whitfield. Thank you for being with us. Where do you want to send people to connect with you and to learn more?
Unfortunately, I'll be like everybody else. I'll say my LinkedIn profile is where I spend my time. Some reason I don't get my notifications on it. So you like,
Okay.
you comment, you anything. I don't really know. I have to check. So send me a message. It's probably the best way.
Copy that. Well, thank you, Ollie. It's been great.